We all know and accept that George Washington is a tremendous human being and one of the most important founding fathers, but continuing the idea of why and understanding why he is so incredible, in addition to adding "So help me God" to the presidential oath of office, to turning down pay or a salary, and then eventually taking it because he's worried about what will future presidents have to come up against. Another thing that Washington does, it is created in the Constitution, but because he's the first, Washington creates the first cabinet. This is going to be a group of advisors who will help influence presidential decisions and policy, as well as they will have control over a distinct department within the executive branch. So laws can be created, and these are the departments that will that will execute these laws. The first four members of the cabinet, we have Thomas Jefferson, who will be Secretary of State, so dealing with issues of diplomacy. Alexander Hamilton, he is Secretary of the Treasury. He had been Washington's aide-de-camp, or his assistant, during the Revolutionary War, and even back then was interested and studying about financial policy. We watched a video in class, a little bit about Hamilton's life and the musical about him. Then we have the Secretary of War, Henry Knox. This position is now called the Secretary of Defense, but their position is pretty clear. Knox has been immortalized in the naming of Fort Knox, where the bulk of the American gold supply is kept. And then we have the Attorney General, and that's Edmund Randolph. So these are the first four positions created. And these men have a considerable amount of influence. Again, Jefferson and Hamilton, we're seeing their differences in their beliefs. We have Jefferson as an anti-federalist, doesn't really like the idea of a strong central government, and Hamilton believes in a strong central government, especially as Secretary of the Treasury. He's going to want to create policies that give the federal government more power, more influence. One of the first important acts passed by Congress during Washington's administration is the Judiciary Act of 1789. In the Constitution, it doesn't say much about this judicial branch, purely that it exists and it can establish inferior courts as necessary. So in this Judiciary Act, it is creating 6 Supreme Court justices. It also sets up a system of circuit and district courts. So there is a national court, but it has jurisdiction over, as you can see here, different areas, because as this country was going to get bigger, it was going to need sort of helpers in that system. And then in September of 1789, we have the Bill of Rights, written by James Madison, so the same man who drafted the Constitution. This is ultimately 10 amendments, 10 changes to the Constitution. Originally, 39 were created. Congress approved 12, and then the states ratified these 10 changes. Ultimately, this process takes until 1791, and really these are all legal issues. Things that especially the Anti-Federalists were afraid of. This is their specific list of rights that they want to protect individual freedoms. Most famously, we have the First Amendment: freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of petition, freedom of religion. Second Amendment is the right to create a militia in order for the people to protect themselves. So specific things: right to a trial with a jury, right to having a lawyer, and really the 9th and 10th Amendments are saying this is not the only list of rights for the citizens, and any power not given explicitly to the United States will go to the states themselves. So we call this sort of the Implied Powers Act, that giving that free hand to the states. That's what those Anti-Federalists were concerned with. we will see still this issue between Anti-Federalists and Federalists, Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. They have two different visions for the United States. The Anti-Federalists want states' rights. The Federalists want national rule, a strong central government. In terms of economically and sort of industrially, what do they want? The Federalists want an urban system with lots of influence on manufacturing. The Anti-Federalists, who will start calling themselves the Republicans, so here we have sort of an emergence of a political party. Republicans, remember I told you early on that a republic means representation. Republicans believe in the power of the agricultural economy, of small farmers, and again, these are people who would be afraid of a strong central government, want their rights to be protected. We also have the issue of tariffs. Hamilton and the Federalists, they want tariffs because they believe this is a way to raise money for the government and to discourage importing things from other countries and encourage producing things in our own country. The Republicans, the Jeffersonians, they don't like this idea of tariffs. They want free trade because they believe that it would be best for the people to get the cheapest product, no matter where it is coming from. They don't want those tariffs, those extra prices, to be passed along to the end consumer, especially those like farmers who don't have a lot of cash on hand. Then there's the issue of debt. At the time, there was this understanding there are three kinds of debt: national debt, state debt, and foreign debt. For the foreign debt, that's going to be things that America owes to countries like France for their assistance in the Revolutionary War. National debt would be things like payments for the Constitutional Army to soldiers and individual state debts. Hamilton suggested that the national government assume all of the state debts, that all of the states are united and pay off these debts together. We were together during the war, let's be together in how we pay off this debt. Jefferson says, no way, we don't want the government to take over this role, in part because Virginia had already paid off their state debt, and he doesn't want the states to have to pay an unequal amount. If one state is in tremendous debt, another state has very little debt. If we all put it into the pile in the middle and we have an equal debt, that means some states pay more than their fair share. Hamilton also suggests a national bank. He believes that this would be good because, the government can pass laws, but without revenue, there's just power in name, not actual power. He wants a national bank because he wants the people to rely on that national government. And if they have a national bank, the people will show loyalty. And he gets these ideas from European banks, specifically the Bank of England. Now, he believes this will provide stability for this brand new country. This is a major problem for Jefferson and Hamilton. Jefferson really does not want a national bank. He doesn't want the states to have to assume the debt under a national system. So they have to find compromise somehow. This is going to happen at the dinner table bargain. One thing that is an issue on top of all of this is, where is the capital city going to be located? And so Hamilton and Jefferson are going to have dinner, and they are going to figure out these issues and come to a compromise. They agree that the capital city will be located near the state of Virginia, Jefferson's home state, and eventually that will become the Washington District of Columbia. So this is their agreement, that in return for locating the national capital city close to Jefferson's home state, that Jefferson will agree to allow a national bank and assumption of state debts. That capital city needs to be planned out, and so Pierre L'Enfant is chosen to plan out the city. You can see there on the diagram It's constructed in a way that would allow for military protection. You see, we have the grid, which is very simple, but in terms of those circles and those diagonal streets, that's really for allowing a military to get in and out with ease. One person that's really important in making this plan happen is Benjamin Banneker. He was a surveyor, and he would sort of put these plans into action. When Pierre L'Enfant leaves the country, Banneker essentially remembers the plans from memory, and you are reading an exchange of letters from Benjamin Banneker to Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson was also sort of interested in architecture and planning, and it would seem that these two men would have lots in common, but they don't, because there's one major difference between Benjamin Banneker and Thomas Jefferson. At this time, we see the issues of the French Revolution. It's 1789. The French are inspired by our revolution. They create a Declaration of Rights, and with their new government, they send a representative. They send an ambassador. That is going to be Edmond Genet. He's called Citizen Genet. Remember, once the king and queen of France are killed, we eliminate those social classes or the estates and create total equality, all citizens. Here we see Citizen Genet meeting President Washington, but Washington really wanted neutrality. He really wanted to make sure that America wasn't choosing sides. This is difficult for Jefferson and Hamilton. Jefferson is very pro-France, while Hamilton is very pro-Britain. In addition to just meeting the president, Genet is doing some other things. He is recruiting privateers to work against British ships, and he doesn't talk to Washington about this. And so, as a result, Washington says it really is important that America stays neutral, especially when there are belligerent powers. France and Britain are fighting. We shouldn't get in the war. And because Genet was sort of going against the general rules of diplomacy, Hamilton and Jefferson are able to come to an agreement. Even though Jefferson sides with France, Hamilton sides with Britain, Genet was not following the rules. So these two are able to find, again, common ground and say, we're not going to go against neutrality simply because someone is bullying us into it. Genet ultimately is recalled back to France. They feel he didn't do his job adequately. Genet does not go back. He is allowed to stay in America because the Reign of Terror was going on. But as a result, from here, the American government creates clear guidelines, about diplomatic relationships. Another thing that will be difficult during Washington's administration is the Whiskey Rebellion. As a way to raise money, there will be a tax, a sales tax on all distilled spirits. Whiskey was the most popular at the time, and this is a way to raise revenue. When this rebellion breaks out, it's because these are especially farmers, rural areas. They don't want to pay this tax, so they rebel. They actually start fighting, and this is a chance for the national government to show its strength and some of its benefits. So a militia is created of several states, Virginia, Maryland, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and they work together under the power of the national government to put down the rebels. What this shows is that the national government does have the strength to put down violent resistance. It also shows that there are continued issues on the frontier. In particular, we have issues along the Mississippi River. As the frontier is going further and further westward, these people are going to want protections. One issue is that Spain had not kept up their end of the bargain with the Treaty of Paris from 1783. Another issue related to the frontier is Britain. Britain had not vacated their forts yet. This was part of the Treaty of Paris of 1783. The British were probably also encouraging Indian tribes in the Northwest Territories to attack American settlers. Another issue is that British ships would impress American sailors, not to say like, oh, that's so impressive, but impressment, meaning that the British were taking American sailors and forcing them into British service. Another issue is that the British aren't agreeing to trade with the Americans, as well as the border with Canada has not been specified yet. And then we have the issue of slaves. Britain was demanding. Then we have the issue of slaves. When Britain freed several thousand slaves in return for serving in the British Army, those American slave owners hadn't been paid. So now some of these American slave owners were demanding to be compensated for their slaves. President Washington sends John Jay to negotiate with Britain. And so the things that he will be able to accomplish: one, the British do vacate the forts. British merchants will be paid back. Some of them hadn't been paid back from previous debts before the war. Unfortunately, though, that's as much as Jay accomplishes. The Indians continue to attack on the frontier. Impressment of American sailors continues, and this might be more of a positive than a negative. Jay ignores the issue of repaying the slave owners. He was vehemently anti-slavery. This does sort of anger some Southerners, but the job is done. The result of this treaty is a bit controversial. He had offered Britain most favored nation trading status, and in many ways, this is demonstrating that the U.S. is giving up more than it gained. The Republicans, the Jeffersonians, they feel that it hurts their relationship with France. The settlers are upset because they still have Indian issues, and they just barely are able to avoid war. Economically, America will begin to flourish a bit more, even though we feel that we've given up a little bit of power to Britain. The wars going on in Europe, while we maintain technical neutrality, our economy is actually going to improve. The countries in Europe are going to start demanding American products and American crops. So this will help move us in the direction of Hamilton's idea of a market economy. After 2 terms, George Washington decides he will not run again. And once again, he is setting a precedent. He is setting a standard. It was not a law. It was not required of him. But from here on out, most presidents will serve 2 terms, or at least attempt to serve 2 terms. In his farewell address, he covers a few issues that will be important, that we'll keep coming back to over the next few units. He talks about the issue of political partisanship. He talks about the role of the Constitution and foreign affairs. And so you are looking at an abbreviation, or excuse me, an abridged version of his farewell address. And we'll continue talking about these issues as we continue this year in U.S. history.